A young black man bought an old blue sedan for $800. His name was William, and he wore a denim jacket that fit him like memory. Sturdy, simple, and real. The car wasn't new, not even close. The paint was dull in some places, chipped in others, and the back bumper carried a dent shaped like a small story no one remembered. But to William it was something more than metal and miles. It was a second chance. He had been taking the bus for months, standing in the cold, running late to shifts that barely covered rent. Life had been a long stretch of almost saving enough, almost catching a break, almost moving forward. When he saw that small ad online, used blue sedan, $800, runs good, and something inside him said, go. He met the seller behind a small repair shop on the edge of town. The man didn't say much, just nodded, handed him the keys, and walked away after the money changed hands. It felt less like a transaction and more like something being passed on. William climbed inside. The seat was stiff. The air inside smelled of time, dust, oil, and faint traces of a woman's perfume that lingered like a memory refusing to fade. He turned the key. The engine coughed twice, then started, humming a low, steady song. He smiled. It wasn't the sound of power, and it was the sound of progress. He pulled onto the main road, feeling the weight of his world lift just a little. The city rolled by outside his window. Cracked sidewalks, kids on porches, corner stores still lit from the night before. Every turn of the wheel felt like motion, like the kind of forward he'd been praying for. When he reached his place in a small, brick duplex tucked at the end of a quiet street, and he parked beneath the flickering streetlight and sat there for a long time. The blue sedan hummed softly as the rain began to fall. It wasn't much, but it was his. For the first time in a while, he felt peace. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. William stepped outside, zipped his denim jacket, and decided to clean his new car. He wanted it to shine, even if only a little. He started with the seats, brushing away crumbs and dust. Then the floor mats, a few coins, an old keychain, and a torn movie ticket fell loose. The glove box held a faded map and a church bulletin dated years ago. He smiled at the small relics of someone else's life. Then he popped open the trunk. At first, all he saw was a folded gray blanket and an umbrella missing half its ribs. He almost closed it until something caught his eye beneath the mat. It was a small leather-bound Bible. The cover was worn, soft from years of being held. The edges of the pages were frayed, the gold lining faded to bronze. He brushed the dust away and opened it. On the inside cover in neat blue ink was a note written by hand. To my dear friend Lillian, keep the faith always. Love, Mary. William froze. His breath caught in his throat. The world around him seemed to still. No wind, no sound, just the low thrum of his heart. That handwriting, that name, that Mary. He knew it instantly. It was his mother's handwriting. He turned the pages slowly, fingers trembling. Notes filled the margins, verses underlined, phrases circled, small reflections written in her hand. Faith endures. Be still and trust. God's timing, not mine. He hadn't seen that handwriting since before she passed, 10 long years ago. Tears blurred his vision. He ran his hand over the ink as if touching it might bring her back. His mother's Bible, her words, her spirit resting right here. Inside this car he'd bought from a stranger for $800. He sat down on the curb, the Bible heavy in his hands. The sunlight caught the edge of the pages and turned them gold. He flipped to the back where she always wrote little reminders to herself. There, folded between the last pages, was a small note. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed, fragile. In the same delicate handwriting he read, "If you ever find this, know that I love you still. I never stopped." His chest tightened. He couldn't breathe for a moment. The street, the car, the world, and everything fell away. How could this be? How could his mother's Bible end up here in this car, in his hands, a decade after she'd gone? Then he remembered the name written inside. Lillian, his mother's best friend. He hadn't seen her in years, not since the funeral. She had moved away, somewhere quiet. Could this car have belonged to her? Could it have traveled all this way only to find him again? It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a message. The car, the Bible, the note, all of it had found him for a reason. That night William couldn't sleep. The Bible lay open on the table beside his bed, pages whispering in the breeze from the cracked window. He read until his eyes burned. Verses about forgiveness, patience and faith through loss. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing: this wasn't over. The old blue sedan had brought him something that money couldn't buy: a piece of his mother's spirit. A sign that maybe she had one more story to tell him, one more message to send. And as dawn broke, William zipped his denim jacket, picked up the Bible, and walked outside. The blue sedan waited at the curb, quiet and steady. He didn't know where the road would lead, but he knew now that it was calling him somewhere his heart needed to go. He started the engine. The hum of the car sounded different this time, softer, almost alive. And as he pulled away, the light of morning glinted off the hood like a promise. The morning air was cool. The sky washed in pale gold as William drove through the quiet streets. The Bible sat on the passenger seat beside him, resting like something alive, a heartbeat from another time. He couldn't stop glancing at it. The way the light touched the old cover, the way the ribbon marker peeked from its pages like it had been waiting for him to find it. He didn't have a plan, not exactly, but he had a name: Lillian, the woman written on the first page. His mother's best friend. The last person, maybe, who could explain how that Bible, her Bible, had ended up in this car. William hadn't seen Lillian in nearly a decade. After his mother's funeral, the years had swept him away: jobs, moves, struggles, silence. He remembered her as a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She had been like a second mother once, and now she might be the missing piece in this story that didn't make sense. He drove out toward the west side of town, where his mother and Lillian had both lived when he was a boy. The streets were older there: cracked sidewalks, oak trees bending low, houses that seemed to remember everything. The kind of place where time didn't pass, it lingered. He parked outside a small, worn house with faded yellow paint. The front porch sagged slightly, but there were flowers in the window. Someone still cared for this place. He didn't go to the door yet. Instead, he sat in the car, staring at the house, listening to the soft ticking of the engine cooling down. The past felt thick in the air, pressing close. He thought of his mother and how she and Lillian used to talk on that porch for hours, voices rising and falling like music on a summer night. He could almost hear them. Finally, he got out, clutching the Bible. But when he stepped onto the porch, he noticed something strange: a for sale sign leaning against the railing. It looked recent. The house might be empty. He knocked anyway, once, twice. No answer. He turned to leave, but a voice called from across the street. An older man raking leaves. Without words, just through a nod, the man pointed down the block. William followed the direction until he saw another house, smaller, tucked between two tall pines. A mailbox out front read Henderson. That was Lillian's last name. He walked up the gravel drive, heart pounding. When he reached the porch, he stopped. The curtains in the window shifted just a little. Then the door opened halfway, and there she was, Lillian, older now, slower, but still carrying that same quiet strength. Her eyes flickered with recognition before she said a word. She looked at William like she was seeing a ghost. She motioned him inside. The house smelled of lavender and old paper. Pictures lined the walls: her children, church groups, and one small frame near the hallway that stopped William cold. It was a photo of his mother. You could see the two women together, arms around each other, smiling under the summer sun, back when the world still felt whole. He set the Bible on the table. The moment Lillian saw it, her hand flew to her chest. She whispered something under her breath, eyes filling with tears. She reached out and touched it, trembling. Then she looked at William again, as if confirming what her heart already knew. He didn't have to ask. Her face told him everything. The car, the old blue sedan, had once belonged to her. She explained quietly that years ago, after his mother passed, she had taken the Bible from the family home for safekeeping. She couldn't bear to see it boxed away, forgotten. It reminded her of her friend, of laughter, prayers, and all the nights they'd spent talking about faith and fear and raising sons in a hard world. But as time went on, things changed. She grew old. Her children moved away. She sold the car. Life carried her forward, and she never thought of what she'd left behind in that trunk. Until now. The tears rolled down her cheeks as she traced the writing on the first page. To my dear friend Lillian. She told William his mother had always believed that certain things find their way: home, people, words, even pain. That God had a way of returning what was meant for you, even when it came through strange hands. And now that had happened. The Bible had come back. William sat quietly as she spoke, the sound of her voice weaving through the stillness. Every word felt heavy with memory. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear about his mother from someone who knew her, not as a mother but as a woman. Lillian told him about nights when Mary would stay up praying for him, worried he'd lose his way, about how proud she'd been when he graduated, how she used to keep his school photos pressed between Bible pages like blessings folded into paper. She said his mother never stopped believing that one day, William would come to understand why faith mattered, not in church walls, but in life's storms. When she said that, something inside him broke open. He realized how far he'd drifted from those lessons, how many nights he'd cursed the sky, angry at everything, his losses, his poverty, his loneliness. And yet here he was, sitting in the house of his mother's best friend, holding the Bible she'd written in, found in the car that somehow found its way to him. Coincidence, maybe, but in his heart he knew better. As the sun dipped lower, William rose to leave. Lillian hugged him tightly, and with a kind of hug that feels like it's meant to heal something invisible. She told him to keep the Bible, said his mother would have wanted that. When he stepped outside, the evening light painted the world in amber and shadows. The blue sedan waited at the curb, silent and steady. William got in and sat for a while, watching the house through the windshield. The Bible rested in his lap again, warm from Lillian's hands. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. He drove home slow, the city lights rising one by one, each glow reflected in the windshield like small memories flickering back to life. When he parked, he sat in the quiet. The hum of the cooling engine faded, replaced by something softer. Peace. He opened the Bible once more and turned a few pages. There, written in his mother's hand beside a verse from Isaiah, were words underlined twice. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." He closed the book, whispering her name to the night. Something told him this wasn't just the end of a mystery. It was the beginning of something larger. The car, the Bible, the message, no, they had all returned for a reason. And as the moonlight brushed the old blue sedan, William understood one thing clearly. Sometimes, the road back home is paved not with miles but with meaning. He didn't yet know what came next, but he knew the journey wasn't over. The past had found him. Now it was his turn to follow where it led. The night after visiting Lillian, William couldn't sleep. The Bible sat on the table beside him, open to the verse he'd found before. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." The words glowed softly under the light from his window, like they were alive, whispering something meant only for him. He tried to close his eyes, but his mind wouldn't rest. Every sound, and the creak of the house, the faint rumble of cars on the street, carried the same quiet message. There's more to this story. By morning, he knew he couldn't ignore it. He brewed a pot of coffee, tucked the Bible carefully into his bag, and stepped outside. The old blue sedan waited, glistening with dew. The air was cold and still, the kind of morning that made everything feel possible and uncertain all at once. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but the pull inside him was strong. He felt it deep in his chest, a voice saying, "Follow where the truth leads." As he drove, memories began to rise like ghosts from long ago. He saw his mother standing in their old kitchen, apron tied, humming hymns as sunlight streamed through the window. He heard her laughter, soft but sure, even when money was tight and life was hard. He remembered her telling him that one day, everything lost would find its way home, even people, especially people. And now 10 years later, her words had found him again. He turned off the main road and headed west, toward the town where his mother grew up. It had been years since he'd been there, but his hands seemed to know the way. The drive was long and quiet, lined with tall trees that swayed like silent witnesses. Halfway there, the sky turned gray. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. But he kept going. The further he drove, the heavier the air felt, not in a way that frightened him, but in a way that reminded him that he was close to something sacred, something meant to be uncovered. He arrived just as the first drops began to fall. The town was smaller than he remembered, the streets emptier, the stores fewer. Time had stripped it down to the bones. He parked outside the church where his mother used to sing in the choir. The old sign out front still read Mount Olive Baptist Church, though the paint was peeling. The doors were open. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and dust. And something else, something tender, like candles that had burned for Years in the name of prayers still, waiting to be answered. He walked down the aisle, the sound of his footsteps echoing softly. The pulpit stood quiet, and behind it a small plaque caught his eye. It read, "In loving memory of Mary Thompson, a voice that still sings." His throat tightened. He reached out and touched the plaque, his hand trembling. Seeing his mother's name there brought the years rushing back. Her voice filling the church, her faith standing firm even when her body grew weak. He sat in the front pew and opened the Bible on his lap. The pages fluttered as if moved by wind that wasn't there. He turned to the back where her handwritten notes filled the margins. Prayers, verses, small reminders of hope. But then he noticed something different. There was a folded envelope tucked between two pages near the end. It looked older than the rest, sealed but brittle. On the front, written in the same familiar handwriting, were the words, "For William, when you are ready." He stared at it for a long time, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say. But then he remembered her voice, calm, steady, full of love. She had left this for him. She had planned for this. His fingers shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a letter. The ink had faded in places, but her words were clear enough to read. She wrote about the things she never had the chance to tell him, the fears she carried, the mistakes she made, and the dreams she never got to see come true. She said she'd known her time was short, and she worried about leaving him alone, but she also said that love doesn't end where life does. It changes. It follows, it finds. She told him that if he ever found her Bible, it would mean he was finally ready to see who he truly was. Then came a line that stopped his breath. "You were never lost, William. You were just finding your way back home." Tears blurred his vision as he read. The words felt like her hand on his shoulder, her voice beside him again. She told him about Lillian, how she had given her the Bible because she trusted her to keep it safe, and she mentioned the car, the blue sedan. In the letter, she wrote that the car had once belonged to her years ago, before she fell ill. It had been her way to work, her freedom, her prayer on four wheels. When she sold it to Lillian, she had slipped the Bible into the trunk without telling her, because she believed that one day, somehow, that car would find its way back to her son. William sat frozen, the letter trembling in his hands. Everything connected. The car, the Bible, the note. His mother had planned it, not the when, not the how, but the return. She had trusted that life, faith, and time would carry it where it needed to go. And now here he was. He pressed the letter to his chest and wept quietly in the empty church. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. It wasn't sorrow that filled him, and it was peace. A peace he hadn't known in years. When he finally looked up, the sky outside the stained glass windows had brightened. Light broke through, scattering colors across the pews, reds, blues, golds, like heaven itself was painting the room. He smiled through his tears. His mother's truth wasn't about loss or death. It was about faith that endures, love that returns, and messages carried on roads we don't yet understand. He closed the Bible gently, the letter tucked safely inside, and stood. As he walked back to the car, the rain stopped. The world smelled new. He looked at the blue sedan, the same car that had unknowingly carried his mother's final message across years, hands and miles. He placed his hand on the hood and whispered, "Thank you." The engine started on the first turn, smooth and strong. As he pulled away from the church, the clouds parted and sunlight poured down on the road ahead. And for the first time in a long, long while, William wasn't driving away from his past. He was driving with it. The truth had found him, and now he was ready to live it. The road stretched long and quiet beneath the morning sun. William drove the old blue sedan, down the narrow highway that led, back toward the city, his hands steady on the wheel. The Bible rested on the seat beside him, open just slightly as if breathing. The letter, his mother's letter, was tucked carefully inside. He didn't play music. He didn't need to. The hum of the engine was enough, steady, faithful, like the sound of something meant to last. He had left the small town behind, but the peace he found there stayed with him. Every mile felt lighter. Every gust of wind through the open window carried pieces of her voice, not in words, but in feeling, love, guidance, presence. The world looked different now. The same roads, the same houses, the same tired buildings. Yet everything seemed touched by grace. He saw beauty where he once saw burden. He saw his mother's lessons in every small, living thing, the trees swaying in rhythm, the clouds drifting without hurry, the sunlight that always returned no matter how long the night had been. For the first time, he wasn't running from memories. He was driving through them. Each turn of the wheel a reminder that pain could lead to peace if you let it. He thought of her words again. "You were never lost, William. You were just finding your way back home." Those words had healed something deep in him, something he didn't know had been broken all these years. As the miles rolled by, he began to realize that his mother's message wasn't only about the Bible or the car. It was about life, about the way faith finds you even when you stop looking for it, about how love once planted never really dies. By noon, he reached the edge of the city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, tall buildings rising from the haze. He stopped at a small overlook where he could see it all, the place that had shaped him, hurt him, and kept him alive. He stepped out of the car, Bible in hand, and let the wind move through his hair. The city stretched wide before him, full of noise, history, and stories that looked nothing like his but still beat in the same rhythm. He thought of his mother again, of her laughter, her prayers, her hands that always smelled faintly of soap and hope. He whispered a thank you into the air, not expecting an answer, but somehow feeling one anyway. The clouds shifted. Sunlight poured across the hood of the car, lighting up the blue paint until it almost gleamed. He smiled. This car, this $800 dented, weary sedan, had carried him through more than distance. It had carried him through grief, through questions, through silence. It had carried him home. He climbed back inside and started the engine. It purred softly, no longer sounding tired. As he drove into the city, he began to notice small things he hadn't before. Children playing by a hydrant, a woman sweeping her porch, a man sitting alone at a bus stop, eyes on the horizon. Every face, every scene, every quiet moment, all of it pulsed with the same truth his mother had tried to teach him. We're all just finding our way home. When he reached his block, the afternoon light had turned golden. He parked in front of his apartment, the same spot where this journey began. The blue sedan looked different now, though nothing about it had really changed. What had changed was him. He sat for a long while, hands resting on the wheel, eyes soft with memory. Then gently he opened the Bible one last time. The ribbon marker lay across a page from the Book of Psalms, one of his mother's favorites. She had underlined a single verse and written beside it, in small, careful letters, "The road is long, but it leads to peace." He smiled. The words felt like her voice again, wrapping around him, soothing, unshakable. He closed the Bible, placed it on the passenger seat, and leaned back. The quiet filled the space between heartbeats. He realized then that grief had never been the end of her story, or his. It had just been a road, winding and rough, meant to lead him here. To understanding, to faith, to peace. The world outside continued on. Cars passing, children laughing, wind rustling through the trees, and somewhere in all that sound, he thought he heard her hum again, that same old hymn she used to sing when the nights were long and the bills were heavy. He let the sound linger. When the streetlights came on, William finally stepped out of the car. He looked at it one last time, the blue paint glimmering faintly beneath the light, and smiled. He didn't need to drive anymore to find what he'd been searching for. He had already arrived. He whispered, "Thank you, Mama," and closed the door softly. The old blue sedan sat still and silent beneath the darkening sky. Its journey complete. Inside, the Bible remained open on the seat, pages fluttering in the breeze through the cracked window. It was as if the wind itself was turning the pages, finding one final verse to rest upon. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The words settled into the quiet. The car seemed to sigh, the air around it peaceful, as if something sacred had come full circle. And somewhere far beyond what eyes could see, a mother's spirit smiled, because her boy, her William, had finally found his way home.